Welcome to the Property Regeneration Podcast. In this podcast, we discuss innovative products and services that meet either local, social, technological, environmental, political, and legal needs within the construction industry or property market. Introducing your host, a property developer and investor, Rachel Gros.
Hi, I'm Rachel Gros. Welcome to part 1 of the discussion on innovative technologies. You can listen to part 2 of this discussion in 2 weeks.
So today we're here with Niall Healy. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes.
A bit of context of where we are.
Of course. My name is Niall Healy. I'm a chartered architectural technologist.
Yep.
And we're actually meeting in the central offices of the Chartered Institute of Architectural Technology.
Yes.
Our institute offices in Old Street, Angel.
Yep.
And the institute actually was formed in 1965 and got Royal Charter in 2005.
Okay.
Now, what's relevant about that is it shows how this branch of the profession has evolved in the last 50 years. And it really is in response to the way technology has evolved in construction. Because up till, say 50 years ago, technology didn't evolve in the leaps and bounds it has done in the last 50 years. And indeed in the last 20 years, when you look at the industry as a whole.
Correct, yes. That's right. Okay, so what we're going to look at today, just a little context of how the interview is going to be structured. We'll be looking at innovative technologies, then we'll be looking at innovative launches. We discussed the Cubot that you'd mentioned a while back, and then inspiring publications related to innovative technologies. So do you want to kickstart by perhaps telling us a few projects that you've worked on that have involved quite innovative technologies?
Yes, indeed. Our practice is a relatively small practice. We're 4 individuals.
Okay.
But we're very keen in looking at more effective and efficient ways to construct. And we have worked with 2 systems which would really be described as modern methods of technology. And that is using SIPS panels and also using insulated concrete formwork. Now, SIPS panels are essentially a panel of insulation with a sheet of OSB compressed on each face.
Yes.
And they're prefabricated for the building form, and then they're assembled very quickly. Now, when I say very quickly, I'll give you an example. The project that we were working on, where we built a 65 square meter cinema, a gym and steam and room and sauna at the bottom of somebody's garden.
Yes.
While the panels were being fabricated in Scotland, we were on site installing the pile foundations and the ground beams.
Okay.
And just as we'd finished doing the foundations, the panels turned up within 48 hours because we were quite good at sequencing at that point, and everybody did their part, which is an important part in construction. They arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, and on Friday morning, we had the electricians and the plumbers doing their first fix.
Okay.
Now, if we use a traditional form of construction, of cavity wall construction, we would have been on site for maybe 2 or 3 weeks before we would get to that stage. So that actually accelerated the program by 3 weeks, which was a great benefit time-wise. There were also some cost benefits as well, but they were relatively marginal in the scheme of the build. The other form of construction that we've used, and we've completed 2 projects in the last 12 months using this form, is insulated concrete formwork. And essentially what that is a polystyrene cavity block. And in the center of that block is mass concrete with reinforcing steelwork. There is a permanent shuttering of the same polystyrene for the floors, and there are 200 millimeter thick slabs of polystyrene reinforced steel that form the roof.
Yeah. And
on that project, we measured it against construction cost and time.
Yes.
And it worked out something in the region of £35,000 cheaper than traditional masonry and carpentry structure construction. And it was about 4 weeks quicker. So there was a real advantage. And you end up with a building that is essentially a reinforced concrete box. So there was advantages in building using that system. So they're the 2 systems that we have, I won't say experimented with because they are tried and tested forms of construction, but there were 2 systems that we introduced in our practice in the built work that we were doing.
Okay. So just as using that as an example of something you've taken on as a small practice to, in a sense, implement into your projects, how did you find that transition from moving away from the traditional forms of construction to using these technologies?
I think as a technologist, we actually found it a kind of great, not so much a challenge, but a great adventure to start looking at other ways we could construct buildings. From a document production point of view and research point of view, there was no real difference in terms of doing the normal research you would do using any other form of construction and looking at the elements of construction that you build and the details. So it added some variety to what maybe we would have built with prior to that. But that's one very small part of what's happening in the industry. I'm talking from our experience as a practice.
Yeah.
But the move towards offsite construction, which is using similar techniques of prefabrication, is becoming a much more topical subject at the moment, especially in the construction of schools. There's an initiative where there's a consortium that have recently launched that are looking at ways in which they can deliver using offsite construction and deliver against the agenda for the school building program that is the government are seeking to achieve. And offsite construction offers a whole layer of benefits, I think, to the industry.
Yeah.
One aspect is improving quality. The second aspect is that you can build a large proportion of the components for the building in areas that need employment and then transport to areas that need housing. So you don't then need to transport the labour to the site where the need is. You can actually build and source the labour off site. I think there's another aspect to it as well, as the government keep pushing up the retirement age, so it's getting further and further away from all of us.
Yeah.
If you're working on a building site for your entire career, it is a relatively harsh environment at certain points of the year.
That's right.
If you take a large proportion of that workforce and they're working within a factory environment, then it's a much better environment for people's well-being. So actually, there's a better opportunity for people to have a longer working life because the work environment is very different. So you reduce the amount of workforce necessary to construct a building on the site, where essentially it's more of an assembly operation, and the construction operation happens then within a factory environment.
See, I quite like that idea of the health aspects of it when you're thinking about these new technologies that are coming in place and looking at the health and safety aspect on site and the life expectancy of people, in a sense, being increased because of the type of environment and technologies that they're working with.
Yeah.
How do you, what do you think is, will be a barrier for, let's say, someone who's looking to come into the construction industry and who wants to actually implement these modern technologies? It doesn't so much know that much about them, but it's more fixated on traditional forms of construction. How would you get someone to change their mindset to start considering these new technologies and working with be it a manufacturer, supplier, or via contractor on their first time project? Let's say they're wanting to do a housing extension. How would you coach them through that process?
That's a very interesting question, actually, in terms of the appetite to take on a new form of construction. Yeah. I think the construction industry as a whole are very late adopters of technological innovation. And there's a kind of certain resistance to it to some degree. So that's a cultural thing. If somebody is designing an extension to their home, then it's often driven by the practicality of availability of materials, the scale of the project. Offsite can really be limited by the scale of the work that you're undertaking. So take a typical Victorian terraced brick house in London. It probably makes sense to use something more traditional. Now, when I say something more traditional, there are other forms of construction where you single block construction, external insulation and render systems, where you, in that form of construction, you eliminate the cavity in the wall. And therefore, you eliminate all of the flashings that go around the openings. And in doing so, you eliminate some of the workmanship risks. So there are ways to implement elements of more modern forms of construction than just the cavity wall on something like an extension, for example. But you've touched on something very fundamental about the industry. In 2016, Mark Farmer delivered a report. It's called the Farmer Report. It was commissioned by government to look at the labour model within the construction industry. And essentially he had identified a list of issues with the industry. And one of the issues is it's not an attractive industry for people to enter into. So the image of the industry needs to change. The other aspect is there's a very fragile economic model with construction in terms of construction financing. And with off-site construction, that is a very large capital investment. So you do need a pipeline of work. So the economic model needs to be looked at in that respect to make that a sustainable investment for somebody to go into the manufacture of off-site elements. But the strapline of the report, the Farmer Report, is it says modernize or die. So that kind of gives you a very ominous view of where we are at the moment and where we need to go as an industry in terms of looking at modern methods of construction and off-site construction.
Precisely. Do you think suppliers are looking ahead and considering the smaller supply of this off-site construction, or they're still fixated on just the masses of the larger companies that are wanting to implement these modern methods?
I think with all industries, it's a trickle-down effect. You know, when NASA took the first Apollo to the moon, they did it on computing power that you probably have on your digital watch now. And in fact, a smartwatch will have more computing power than that vehicle had. So it's about trickle down. I think we're probably at a tipping point now where the topic is so evident within discussion in the construction press that the more companies that get on board in terms of manufacture and the more innovation there is in that process, it will then be possible to scale that down a lot more. Just like in the IT industry, you know, it was a big thing to have a computer in your home at one point. Now we probably have 3 computers at any one time on our person, our laptop, a tablet and a phone. So you take these innovation leaps for granted once they're part of the culture. So I think we will probably be looking at a very different profile of the industry in another 10 years, let alone another 20, because these things will trickle down.
Still at the early stages of it.
To a degree, yes, to a degree.
So if our readers wanted to get hold of this publication of Mark Farmer, where would be the best place?
You'd probably find it online is the best place to look. You know, if you Google the Farmer Report or Google Modernize or Die, you will find it straight away. I mean, I'm sure Amazon and people like that would stock it, but it's a fairly wide read report and publication. And it's very interesting in the way it's examined the state of the industry and how it needs to evolve. Okay,
brilliant. So moving on, the exciting part that I've been wanting to discuss this with you, the Q-bot.
Oh.
Could you enlighten our listeners on what the Q-bot is?
So let's put the kind of carrot out there to entice people to think about this. Imagine that you have to undertake an operation, a construction operation in your home, and it requires you to move out of your house for 2 weeks to get some people in. They'll do the operation, you move back in. Okay. Now imagine that you can get a robot who will do that job in 3 days. And not only will it do it in 3 days, you will not need to move. What that signals is a incremental bit of innovation, a bright idea that suddenly completely changes the profile of that operation. And what it is very simple. It is spraying insulation on the underside of a suspended timber floor. So this particular company have a little robot that scans the environment of the floor and travels underneath with the aid of an operator to spray insulation on the underside of the floor. And you suddenly think about it and say, well, doesn't that make sense? It's really obvious that would be really easy. Yeah. But I think this is where we will see more autonomous vehicles and more robotics on building sites. That as the technology trickles down and it becomes more affordable, certain operations on building sites will be done by autonomous vehicles. Everybody's talking about the driverless car. Well, the driverless car has to navigate a very random environment in the public highway, and that's being developed for the highway. But large building sites, by and large, are very controlled environments. So to have autonomous vehicles transporting goods on site is not such a big leap to make, to imagine that. And suddenly you then have a way of controlling construction site traffic that doesn't require a human being to be present for transportation. There is a innovation research centre up in Sheffield. It's called Factory 2050. And actually, that's where I went to hear Mark Farmer speak on the very topic of this report that he's produced. But in that factory, they're looking at robotics and looking at how you can use robotics in manufacturing. But as construction moves to a more off-site solutions, then it is moving to more of a manufacturing culture than a construction culture. So automation and robotics will then have a part to play in that as well. So I think that's where we are at a little bit of a tipping point where more of these technologies will come online. More innovations like Qbot will happen where somebody has a bright idea, they can see an operation and then find a device that can undertake that more efficiently, more accurately, or whatever it might be. And when you look at that in hand with something like the development of the BIM standards, the Building Information Model, as that model gets more sophisticated, then there is a digital twin of the building that can be downloaded in part to a device who can then undertake certain operations under supervision and control. So I think all of these things are running in parallel, but they will coalesce to see a very big paradigm shift in terms of the construction industry as a whole. And I think then when it's, boys playing with toys, to use the kind of stereotypical phrase, it will actually have a lot more appeal to enter the industry, because it's about being part of something rather than being, getting down in the muck and bullets, as some people try and describe it, in the, literally in the mud building something. You can be part of something that's much more exciting. So I think the industry is going to move in that direction to a certain degree.
Eventually. So with this Qbot, how expensive is it, or how cheap is it to rent out or acquire this robot for those who are intrigued and eager to try it out on their next project?
I haven't asked that question. I've seen it and I've been intrigued about it. The only thing that I can tell you is that Camden Council are using it to upgrade a lot of their housing stock.
Okay.
So I imagine it must be competitive, because if it was a cost issue alone, then you would go the traditional method. But if you add the cost of somebody moving out for 2 weeks along with 2 weeks labor, and you can do something in 3 days, then it would be interesting to see the differential, actually, because of the convenience that it offers.
Thanks for listening to the Property Regeneration Podcast. You can follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram and Pinterest, and contact us on contact@propertyregeneration.co.uk for more content and to have your questions answered. Until next time, adopt innovations to accommodate the growing population.